So the first topic we want to talk about is SSH. SSH it means secure shell. That is, it is a way of your computer to talk to another computer. In this case, your computer wants to talk to the school's servers, and that is where you'll be doing your work, you'll be doing your programming. And the problem is that there's several different ways of doing SSH depending on what operating system that you have. I will be demonstrating this on Windows, but then I'll be telling you the differences so that you can do it if you have a Mac or if you have a Linux machine. Now the first thing we want to look at is for Windows is that there is not an SSH client by default, provided by default. So you need to download a program, or there's actually a couple different options that you can use, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. But the first one I want to talk about is a program called PuTTY. Now, PuTTY also exists on all of these school machines already, so you can use it there without having to download anything. But on your personal machine, if you want to download PuTTY, all that you have to do is go to the website putty.org, which you can see here, and there is a link to download PuTTY there. If you click on that link, it takes you to the download page, and you will see the Windows installation links down here. And you choose if you need the 32-bit or the 64-bit installation, and most modern computers are going to be 64-bit. So you click on that file, the MSI file. Once it downloads, again, just double click on the file, run it, and it will run the installation for you. Once PuTTY has installed itself, you can then start it up by clicking on the icon in your start menu. When PuTTY opens up, you see this screen. It's how you set up a connection. And so I will show you it has a default settings and everything, but all that you have to do is, first of all, under host name here, is that you type in the name of the computer that you're trying to access. And of course, if you look in the description, you'll see the list of computers that you can access, because there's probably 4 or 5 that are going to be available to you. I'm going to use one here called Darrow, and it's worth mentioning right now that some of the computers and some of the names, the host names, are not accessible off of campus unless you've installed the VPN software from the OIT website. And however, the one I'm about to show you so happens to not have that requirement, which is why I'm using it at the moment. And so as you see here, I click in the host name and I type in darrow.cc.nd.edu. That is the name of the server. And I leave everything else the same, port 22, and yes, I can even save this under a session called Darrow. That way I don't have to type it in every time. But there's 1 or 2 other things that I want to mention about PuTTY that are helpful for you to change the settings on. First, I want you to look under Bell. Now, as it so happens, as you use a console program, sometimes it tends to make sounds and they get annoying, and it's usually called the bell. And so instead of having it play a sound, I tell it to do a visual bell, which it just flashes the screen. So it's a little bit less annoying to other people who may be sitting around. The other thing is that if you go under Window and then Translation and the remote character set. Now in this case, normally it's set to one of the Latins. Change that to UTF-8. And that is just so that all the characters display properly. Once you've made those changes, you can go back to session here, and I'm going to just say save that again. And so now when I open up PuTTY, I can just double click on the Darrow selection here, and it opens up. Now it has a question for me. It says that it's a security alert. It's saying that it doesn't know this host, that is, it doesn't know this server yet, and can I verify that it is the correct server? And in which case, generally speaking, we just say yes and go on from there. So now, after you've verified that you're connecting to the correct server, it asks you for your login information. Now the login ID, your username, is your net ID. And in this case, mine is cpennycoo. It's like at the beginning of your email address. And then it asks for your password. So I've typed in my password and it lets me log in. And I am now connected to another server. Now this environment that I connected through is called the command line. And we will say a phrase such as, I've SSH'd into this computer. We'll use SSH as a verb. And we'll say, I'm connecting through SSH. But the amazing thing about this is that this is allowing me to be on my computer, but I can execute commands on another computer, on another server that's located, it may be across the world even, or just downtown in the case of Notre Dame servers. And with that, that's how we get our work done. Now, okay, so this was using PuTTY. I want to show you another way of doing it in Windows, which is going to become more and more prevalent, and that is by installing something called the Windows Subsystem for Linux. Now you can look that up using your favorite search engine, and just you can look up WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux, and how to turn that on or how to enable that. And what it is basically a Linux environment running in Windows. And I'm going to show you what that looks like here. So when you open up the Windows Subsystem for Linux, it's also called the Bash shell. Bash is the name of the program that's running, just like PuTTY was the name of the program we ran a second ago. You see that it opens up with the command line already. But there's a very important difference. Before, we had to connect to another server. Before, we had to connect to Darrow before we saw this command line. Well, now we're seeing the command line, but it is running on our computer. It's running on my computer and not on some server somewhere. So I have to tell this command line to connect to another server. How do I do that? I type in a command. The command in this case is SSH, which again, that's how we're connecting. So it's the method of connection, SSH, is also the command that we use. And then I tell it where I want to connect. And this may look a little long and complicated, but it's actually really easy. This almost looks like an email address. I give it my net ID, which in this case, cpennycoo is mine, and then the @ sign, like an email address, and then the name of the server. And again, the name of the server that I'm going to connect to is darrow.cc.nd.edu. When I do this, it may or may not give me a security warning depending on whether or not I've connected to this server before, and in this case I actually have, so you're not going to see the security warning. And here it asks for my password. So again, my password, and it let me connect. And in both cases, whether I'm using PuTTY or whether I'm using the Windows Subsystem for Linux, I'm able to connect to this remote server. Now, I'm not going to show you how to do this in a Linux system, because basically you just go through the, depending on if you're using Red Hat or Ubuntu or something like that, just look under the, I would call it the Start menu using a Windows term, but the Applications menu. And just look at the options, and there will be something called either Terminal or perhaps Xterm. Actually, they're probably both going to be installed on there. They're both terminal programs, and this environment is called a terminal. They are terminals that you can use, and you will get a command line just like you've seen me using, and you can type in the SSH command in order to connect to those other servers. On a Mac, you're also going to use the terminal program, and that's not hard to get to either. Just open up your Launchpad and look under the Other icon, and in there, there's of course going to be a lot of programs, but there's a program in there called Terminal, and some of you may also have a program called iTerm. And either one of those, again, just terminal programs. They give you a command line, and from there you can type in the SSH command. Now, I should also mention about copying and pasting, because you're going to want to be able to copy and paste. And sometimes it works like you'd expect, sometimes not. And it really depends on which system you're using. If I can show you the PuTTY window again. Now again, this is for Windows, but if I can show you the PuTTY window, if I want to copy in PuTTY, it's as simple as highlighting the text. And as soon as I let go of the mouse button, it is copied to my Windows clipboard. If I want to then paste, I right click and it pastes in that text that I had copied. And yes, I can paste again by right click. And so every time I highlight something, it recopies that information, and then a right click will paste it. In the Windows subsystem for Linux, it's slightly different. I do highlight with my mouse again, but I have to then press Enter on the keyboard for it to copy. However, pasting is the same thing. It is right click, and again another right click and another right click will paste and paste and paste over and over. For the terminal programs in on the Mac, for example, you're going to actually be using your very familiar shortcuts, which are your Command C and Command V for copying and pasting. Again, don't try to use those on Windows because they won't work, but on the Mac they will, the Command C and Command V. And Linux, it actually depends on which program you're using. Some of them it's a highlight and right click to get a menu to say copy and paste. Some of them will allow you to use Control C and Control V to copy and paste. And again, you're just going to have to look around on that program, on whichever program you're using, because they are different. But all in all, this is not a complicated way to interact with a computer. It's just a new way to interact with it. And we'll be looking more into in the future videos, we'll be looking into what we can do with this connection, and we'll be talking about the file system and how do you execute commands and everything like that. But again, we want to remind you to look into the description section, and we will be giving you more information about which servers you can connect to and which ones you need the VPN for, which ones you don't. And from there, you'll be able to get your work started. Thank you.